So you're coming to Japan for a holiday? Great! In this video I'll help you plan your trip to avoid the crowds and get the most out of every day here. I'm going to assume you'll be in Japan for 1 to 3 weeks. We'll be flying in and out of Tokyo, and we'll have the Japan Rail Pass, and use it to travel at least to Kyoto, Osaka and Hiroshima. We'll also look briefly at Nagano, where I am now, Niigata and Hokkaido, which are popular snow destinations in winter, and also Kagoshima at the southern tip of the Japanese mainland. First of all, in Japan, it's really important to plan where you'll go, where you'll stay, and sometimes even where you'll eat in advance, especially during busy periods. So let's take a look at those busy periods. I suggest avoiding coming to Japan during the New Year period, a string of national holidays known as Golden Week, and a Buddhist festival called Obon. It's certainly possible to travel during these times if you need to, but it's important to reserve your train trips and hotels even further ahead than normal. The Sakura, that's cherry blossom, and Koyo, that's autumn foliage seasons, are great times to come to Japan, but reservations are needed well in advance then too, especially in Kyoto. Likewise, accommodation in ski towns should be booked well ahead of time in January and February. Long weekends are the next most busy, followed by normal weekends. So, let's start by planning to be in the busiest places on quiet weekdays and work from there. I suggest starting your planning in the Kansai region, and specifically here in Himeji. It's home to Japan's best preserved medieval castle, which miraculously survived the demolition of most castles for political reasons over a century ago, the firebombing in World War II, and then the Great Hanshin earthquake of 1995. But it can be incredibly busy, so I suggest planning to come here on a quiet weekday. This is especially important during the cherry blossom season. If you don't plan ahead, it may well be like this inside. I generally recommend combining Himeji with Kobe as a day trip from Kyoto or Osaka, although Kobe can be visited any time, or if you don't want to go there, you can just stop at Himeji Castle on your way to Hiroshima, because it's only about a 10-minute walk from Himeji Station. Now let's move on to nearby Kyoto. I suggest planning to be in Higashiyama, the heart of old Kyoto, on 2 consecutive weekdays. One for southern Higashiyama, which is home to Kiyomizu-dera and many other top temples, and the other day for northern Higashiyama, with the Path of Philosophy to Ginkakuji, the Silver Pavilion. It's also possible to combine these 2 itineraries into one long day, especially during the summer. Higashiyama's narrow streets are Japan's busiest, and crowds can spoil them, although not as badly as they spoil Himeji Castle, so that's why I suggest making Higashiyama a second priority for a quiet weekday after Himeji Castle. Most people spend another day in Arashiyama. It's famous for the bamboo grove and for the romance train along the Hozukyo Ravine, which is beautiful during the cherry blossom and autumn foliage seasons. Because Arashiyama is more spread out than Higashiyama, it can be visited on a busy weekend, but if you want to ride the romance train, which I don't generally recommend, then that needs to be booked in advance. This leaves a lot of attractions scattered around central Kyoto. You could spend any number of days exploring all these, or tack them onto other itineraries, especially if you use Kyoto as a base for exploring the Kansai region, as they're easily accessible from Kyoto Station. These places can generally be visited on weekends, but I would avoid the very busy periods like Golden Week and the New Year. Now let's look at Osaka, Japan's anti-capital. I generally recommend spending a day in the city centre to visit its reconstructed castle and other attractions such as Amemura, the American village. If you like spending time with animals, I recommend Net Cafe, a cat cafe which takes care of rescued cats and encourages adoption to good homes, unlike most animal cafes which buy them from breeders. A weekend is generally manageable for central Osaka, although there may be longer queues at the castle. Osaka is also home to Universal Studios Japan, and if you go there then it should be a high priority for a quiet weekday. From either Kyoto or Osaka, I suggest making a day trip to Nara to see the Great Buddha at Todaiji Temple and to meet the city's adorable deer. Because Nara Park is so large, a busy weekend is generally okay, although the temple might be a bit crowded. If you have a whole day, it can be worth stopping off at Uji along the way for the famous Byodoin Temple. During the cherry blossom season, you might also like to spend a day at Mount Yoshino in Nara Prefecture, which is famous for its thousands of cherry trees and its history as the hideout of Emperor Go-Daigo after he lost his throne in 1336. Yoshino also needs a quiet weekday, and train tickets there should be reserved far ahead as well. I also highly recommend staying a night in a Buddhist temple at Koyasan and enjoying Shojin Rori, their traditional cuisine. Any day you can book accommodation and train tickets should be fine. Now let's head further south to Hiroshima, which most tourists visit for its tragic history. The Peace Museum and memorials are probably going to be quieter on a weekday, but not necessarily by much, because many schools make trips there during the week, so the Peace Park is manageable even on busy weekends, as are the city's reconstructed castle and beautiful Shukein garden. But I do suggest keeping a weekday for visiting the nearby island of Miyajima, especially during the autumn foliage period around November, when it's very popular for its maple trees. So that gives us one weekday and any other day for Hiroshima. Heading further south, Kagoshima is best known for Sakurajima, its active volcano, and its role in the Meiji Restoration and the reopening of Japan in the late 19th century. If you have the time and a rail pass, then it can be worth considering spending a day or two in Kagoshima, but most people only go so far south if they're continuing on to or coming from neighbouring Taiwan. The trip from Hiroshima takes about 2.5 hours on the Shinkansen. Being a quiet city, Kagoshima can be visited at any time. Now let's go back to the beginning and look at Tokyo. With about 40 million people in Greater Tokyo, it can handle crowds of tourists much better than smaller cities like Kyoto. In my guidebook, I divide the central city up into 4 main itineraries, all of which can be explored on busy weekends, and some are actually more interesting then. But if you'd like to go to Tokyo Disneyland or Disney Sea, then a quiet weekday is much better, as it is for USJ in Osaka. The rail pass isn't economical for Tokyo, so I suggest not activating it until you're ready to leave the capital for Nikko, which we'll get to soon, or for Kyoto. Now let's look at day or overnight trips from Tokyo, and whether or not you'll want to use your rail pass for them. Many tourists go to Hakone, which is famous for its rare but spectacular views of the sacred mountain and its novel public transport systems. It's best visited on a quiet weekday, and it's best to buy a separate pass for Hakone, which combines transport there with transport around it. So I recommend going when your rail pass isn't activated, although if it is, then it is possible to use it on the way there. Or would you prefer to climb Fujisan? Although it can be reached by bus from Hakone, it's generally best to go by bus directly from Tokyo, so again the rail pass isn't needed, although it's also possible but less convenient to train to the foot of the mountain instead of busing. Fujisan is only open for climbing during the summer, and a weekday would be better, especially if you want to stay in a mountain hut along the way, which is best for safety reasons. These huts must be reserved in advance. Most tourists visit the reconstructed Edo-era buildings in Asakusa, but if you'd like to see real ones, I suggest making a day trip to Kawagoe in Saitama Prefecture. In my guidebook, I recommend combining it with the nearby Alishan Organic Cafe. Again, the rail pass can be used, but it's not economical. As a separate day trip from Tokyo, I highly recommend combining the beautiful, historic port city of Yokohama with the ancient capital of Kamakura. Kamakura's many temples can be visited at any time, although the city and especially its beaches are very crowded during weekends and summer. The rail pass isn't economical for this trip, but it can save a bit on train tickets. The historic capital of Nikko is much further from Tokyo than all of these other day or overnight trips, and is actually slightly further from Tokyo than shown on this map. But because most of that distance can be covered by the Shinkansen, Nikko can easily be visited as a day or overnight trip from Tokyo, although it can also be a good stop on the way to Hokkaido, which we'll get to next. But because the Shinkansen is so expensive, the rail pass is definitely economical for going to Nikko. As the temple area is large, it should be possible to visit any time, although the temples themselves are likely to be more crowded during weekends. Since Nikko and Kamakura are both old capitals, some people wonder which to visit if they don't have time for both. Both are very interesting in different ways, as Kamakura is by the beach and Nikko is in the mountains. And both can be visited any time of the week. The rail pass can be used for both, but is much more economical for Nikko than Kamakura. All considered, I generally recommend Kamakura in the spring and summer, and Nikko in the autumn and winter. Speaking of winter, if you like snow, you might want to ski or snowboard here, as Japan has some of the best powder snow in the world. The two most popular regions for foreign tourists are Hira Nagano and the neighbouring prefecture of Niigata, and the northern island of Hokkaido. Nagano and Niigata are easily reached from Tokyo by Shinkansen, but it's expensive, so it's best to have a rail pass. For most tourists that's the Japan Rail Pass, but there's also a special rail pass for Nagano and Niigata. For vegans and vegetarians who want to go to the snow, I highly recommend Hakuba and Nagano because there are two ski resorts, each with a vegetarian restaurant right on the slopes. Hokkaido can be reached in a whole day on the trains or by a short flight from Tokyo. Some domestic airlines offer discount flights to foreign tourists, so it might be most economical and more interesting to travel to Hokkaido on the last day of your rail pass, ski for a few days, and then fly back to Tokyo. Most ski resorts are likely to be busier on weekends than weekdays, especially Gala Yuzawa in Niigata, which is a popular day trip from Tokyo. If you do make a trip to the snow, I suggest allowing a day or two in Tokyo before flying out, just in case heavy snow causes flights or rarely high-speed trains to be delayed or cancelled. Have a good, safe trip to Japan. Thanks for watching.